The sun crests the horizon, slicing through the morning haze to strike the Giza Plateau. Long, sharp shadows stretch across the sand, retreating as the light intensifies. Three massive stone structures catch the first rays of the day, their limestone surfaces glowing with a brilliant, blinding white. These are not merely piles of rock. They are the physical manifestation of a society that refused to accept the finality of death. To the people of the Old Kingdom, the horizon was not a boundary, but a bridge. Each angle of these monuments was calculated to align with the movement of the heavens, locking the earth to the celestial path. The air is still, heavy, with the weight of centuries, yet the structures feel alive under the shifting light. This is a civilization reaching upward, carving its legacy into the bedrock of the world, daring to claim a place among the stars. Beneath the shadow of the Great Sphinx, the silence breaks. Thousands of hands grip thick ropes. They heave in unison, dragging multi-ton blocks of limestone across wooden sleds. Water pours onto the sand ahead of the runners, reducing the friction, turning the path into a slick, sliding track. Every movement is measured, guided by architects who watch the stars to ensure each stone sits exactly where the heavens demand. The work is relentless, a grinding, physical dialogue between human muscle and solid rock. But the life of this land depends on a different rhythm. Nearby, the Nile begins to swell. The river rises, spilling over its banks to reclaim the valley. It leaves behind a thick, dark layer of nutrient-rich silt. Farmers wade into the cooling mud, casting seeds into the earth. This is Kemet, the Black Land, a narrow strip of dark, fertile soil that fights for every inch against the scorched, golden dunes. The rhythm of the river was broken. In 1650 BC, the desert silence shattered under the thunder of hooves. It was a sound the valley had never known. The Hyksos arrived, not on foot, but in chariots that cut through the sand with terrifying, unnatural speed. They moved like a storm, their wheels carving deep, jagged lines into the dunes. The defenders stood with wooden tools and stone-tipped spears, but they were met with the biting edge of bronze and the long-range reach of composite bows. The impact was absolute. Traditional borders dissolved as the invaders surged forward, their weaponry outclassing everything the local artisans had forged for centuries. Panic rippled through the settlements. The old ways of isolation could no longer hold the line. Egypt faced a binary choice: adapt or vanish. The shock of the invasion forced a rapid, desperate evolution. The state turned its focus from the harvest to the forge. Bronze foundries roared to life, casting blades and arrowheads. The chariot, once a foreign terror, was adopted and refined, becoming the centerpiece of a new, aggressive military doctrine. The forge had done its work. Egypt was no longer a land waiting for the tide. It was a power that commanded the horizon. Hatshepsut took the reins of this new momentum, turning the focus from the battlefield to the trade route. She ordered expeditions into the unknown, pushing ships across the Red Sea to return with holds overflowing with incense, ebony, and gold. The capital swelled with exotic riches, the streets echoing with the arrival of goods from lands that had once been myths. But the reach of the empire was not just in trade. Thutmose III took the bronze-tipped spear and marched. He led his armies out of the Nile Valley, crossing the Levant with the precision of a master tactician. His soldiers moved through the heat, securing mountain passes and capturing fortified cities. They did not stop until the borders touched the banks of the Euphrates. This was the age of the giants, where the power of the pharaohs was measured by the vastness of the territory they held in an iron grip. The expansion halted, not by foreign blades, but by a single, radical command from the throne. Akhenaten stood before the assembly and declared the old gods silent. He pointed to the sun disk, the Aten, and demanded it be worshipped as the sole source of life. The impact was immediate and violent. Priests who had served the inner sanctums for generations found their altars cold. They watched as the king ordered the names of the ancient deities chiseled from the stone walls of the temples. The air in the capital grew heavy with unspoken defiance. This was not merely a shift in faith. It was a tearing of the divine fabric. Akhenaten pushed harder, moving his court to a new city built in the barren desert, leaving the old power centers to fester. The state, once unified by the strength of its borders, now fractured from within. The foundation of the empire began to crack. The desert silence shattered under the thunder of thousands of hooves. At Kadesh, the air turned to a thick, choking veil of dust and iron. Ramesses II stood at the heart of the storm, his chariot carving a path through the surging mass of enemy lines. Wood splintered against wood as wheels locked, and the screams of horses rose above the rhythmic clatter of bronze on bronze. The formation broke. In an instant, the pharaoh was cut off from his main force, isolated in a swirling vortex of blades and desperate men. He did not retreat. He gripped his bow, the strings singing as he unleashed arrow after arrow into the encroaching ranks. The enemy pressed in, their faces masks of sweat and grit, closing the circle. Ramesses braced his feet against the floor of the chariot. His muscles coiled and surged forward. He drove his chariot directly into the thickest knot of the melee, his blade flashing in the harsh light. Every strike was a testament to his claim of divinity, a brutal assertion of power that forced the chaos to bend to his will. The momentum shifted. Where there had been a trap, there was now a rout. The grandeur of the new kingdom did not vanish in a single day. It bled out through 1,000 small wounds. By 1100 BC, the treasury ran dry, and the grain shipments that fed the cities slowed to a trickle. The bureaucracy, once a precise machine, stalled under the weight of internal corruption and competing factions. Sensing the weakness, the borders began to buckle. From the Mediterranean, the sea peoples arrived in a fleet of ships, their hulls scraping against the silt-heavy delta. They struck with relentless, coordinated force, burning granaries and cutting off trade routes. Simultaneously, the Assyrian war machine pushed from the east, while Nubian forces surged from the south, reclaiming territory. The irrigation canals, neglected and clogged with debris, failed to sustain the harvest. Famine took hold in the villages. The central authority eroded, leaving the kingdom a fractured shell. The divine order dissolved into a desperate struggle for survival. The horizon was no longer defined by the rising sun, but by the rhythmic, metallic tread of Roman legions. They marched across the sand, a wall of iron and discipline that the crumbling remnants of the Ptolemaic state could not hope to breach. Cleopatra VII watched from the high terrace as the ships of the Mediterranean fleet lowered their standards, the last symbols of an independent Egypt bowing to the inevitable. There was no battle left to fight. The grain stores were empty, the treasury was depleted, and the loyalty of the provinces had long since evaporated into the heat. She stood before the heavy cedar doors of the palace, listening to the sound of the Roman commander's boots echoing against the stone floor. When the doors finally swung open, the light of the outside world flooded the inner sanctum, stripping away the shadows of the old gods. She stepped forward, her hands empty, and offered the surrender that would close the book on 3 millennia of history. The empires that rose and fell in the valley have long since returned to the earth, but the horizon remains anchored by the stone. Today, the pyramids stand as silent sentinels, their limestone faces scoured by the relentless breath of the desert. They do not react to the passing of centuries or the rise of new powers. They simply exist, massive and unyielding, while the sands shift and swirl around their bases in a perpetual, restless dance. Travelers walk the perimeter, their footsteps vanishing almost as soon as they are made, a brief flicker of life against the backdrop of geological time. The wind whistles through the gaps in the masonry, a low, constant hum that echoes the industry of the thousands who once hauled these blocks into place. It is a stillness that feels heavy with intent. These structures are more than just architecture. They are the physical manifestation of a people who looked at the stars and dared to claim a place among them. As the day reaches its end, the sun begins its slow descent, painting the Nile in deep, bruised hues of violet and liquid gold. The river continues its eternal pulse, carrying the silt that once fed the fields of Kemet. The monuments catch the final rays, glowing with a warmth that defies the cooling air. They stand as a final, enduring reminder of a civilization that reached for eternity and, in the language of stone, succeeded.